From Floyd Shivambu saying Singhambile to Starlink coming into the country avoiding BEE, and of course the curious case of the 700 million rand to be spent on a talk shop. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Let's get the show going. Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Yeah, boy, that's right. Your favorite fat boy is back on your screens, this time syndicated on the Truth Report. Yes, that's right. You can now find the Big Daddy Liberty Show every Monday on the Truth Report. Yes, we'll share the news and indeed bring you the analysis you will not get anywhere else. My name, as I said, is Sihle Ngobese. A reminder to you, if you love the content, you love the show, do me a favor. Whether you're watching this on YouTube, of course, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And make sure you find me on the Truth Report's YouTube page. Grow our numbers on that platform. But hey, enough with the jibber jabber. How about we get straight into the news? We begin here with the story that made the dominated headlines last week of Floyd Shivambu. Yes, that's the former Secretary General of the Umkhonto weSizwe Party, deciding to say, deuces, I'm out. Not officially, of course, leaving the party, but signaling as much, as he indicates at a press conference held last week on Thursday that, well, as he put it, he'll be hosting a national tour to ask South Africans whether they want another political party. Yeah, you heard that right. Another political party on the offering, as if the ballot paper should be any more than 3 pages as it is at the moment. We're becoming rather top heavy with politicians in this country. But nonetheless, speaking at that press conference, Floyd Shivambu indicating his unhappiness with the former president and the leader of the MK party, Jacob Zuma, indicating that Zuma's listening to weird, spurious intelligence reports that are citing, for example, that Floyd Shivambu is using umuti and mythical heads in order to depose him. Yeah, you heard me right. That is the belief that is defining internal politics at the MK party. Again, the question I want to leave you with is really this one. Firstly, South African to South African, do we need another political party in this country? Do we need to hear more from politicians looking, of course, to create more political parties for their careers? What benefit do we derive as ordinary South Africans from another political party? And also, if you're a KZN resident, boy, oh boy, did you not dodge a bullet in the sense of MK party, which is chopping and changing its leaders, being nowhere near the echelons of power in that province. You can count your lucky stars that all of these ructions you're seeing play out are not playing out in what could have been a KZN government. And of course, in other news, 500 million rand, that's 500 million rand being promised by the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, as he looks to bring Starlink to South Africa. Now, what's this 500 million rand for, Big Daddy Liberty, as you're probably asking? Well, it's money that he says he will use to provide free internet services to schools around the country. This, of course, is the juicy morsel that he's dangling in front of the South African government in favor, of course, of him bringing Starlink here and avoiding BEE laws. That's, of course, the trade-off that Musk is trying to pull off. You'll remember this story found itself in my broadband, which I'll read from, having said the following. Now, the planned investment was revealed in a second email to South Africans interested in the satellite internet service. SpaceX appealed to people who previously indicated their interest in Starlink to voice their support for a policy direction proposed by the Communications Minister, Usoli Malatsi. Now, here's the thing. If adopted, the Department of Communications Digital Technologies Policy Direction number 3218, a mouthful, would introduce equity equivalence investment programs, that's EEIPs, in the ICT sector, amongst other things. End of quote. Now, that EEIP policy is exactly what I was describing earlier, a effectively alternative to existing BEE or race-based legislation that is aimed, of course, to cut a portion of a company and to hand it out, as has been the case so far, to elite black individuals in this country. Now, there are existing cases of this where these alternatives are already in place in various industries. These include the automotive, manufacturing industry, pharmaceuticals in this country, and ICT companies who have benefited from these alternatives. Musk, of course, barging himself ahead of the queue, saying, "Me too," when it comes to these arrangements. But here's the question I want to leave you with. Is it time for South Africa to abandon race-based legislation when it comes to empowerment? Should we be taxing companies that are looking to invest in the country by saying you must give away a portion of your business to what has effectively been, if you look at the track record over the last 30 years, to elite individuals who are very connected to politicians? Who should benefit from empowerment programs is the question I'm posing here. Should it be the elites in this country who effectively, if you listen to one professor, William Gumede, about R1 trillion has been dispersed to only around 100 beneficiaries in this elite group? Should we continue with that status quo under the guise, of course, of race-based empowerment law? Or should we expand empowerment law to actually benefit poor individuals, such as, in this instance, a R500 MILLION investment into poorer schools which could desperately use free internet services and improve the quality of education? That's the question you need to ask yourself on this matter. And in other news that made the headlines last week, the issue of extortion rings, these mafias, if you will, who are taking over contracts, muscling their way in using violence, hit the headlines, this time in the most bizarre of instances. I'll get to those in a moment. Let me just give you a bit of background as to this particular issue. Now, you'll know that since around the 2009, these business forums, who often form these groupings which are very well armed, muscling their way in on construction sites, for instance, demanding a quote-unquote 30% share of the business in that part of the world. Now, where did that come from? Where did that stem from? Well, a lot of pundits saying it stemmed from the Jacob Zuma era of his presidency, where he promised individuals effectively that radical economic transformation means that being black entitles you to 30% of business. Now, this created a very toxic, if you will, political movement of these various business forums that started muscling in on contracts, demanding their fair share, in inverted commas, of this 30%. It started with state contracts, then it moved to even private sector businesses who couldn't even operate or create new investments without the fear of these mafia or these construction mafias that were also masquerading as quote-unquote business forums. That trend, unfortunately, has proliferated. It's become worse, where we now see even the smallest of construction sites to the largest being affected by these extortion gangs. The more recent cases of these, which are now becoming indeed an impediment to South Africa's economy, were spoken of by the Western Cape government last week. These extortion mafias and construction mafias, if you will, are becoming an economic impediment, as was discussed by the Western Cape government at a conference last week held, of course, where it saw all the hobnobs of the Western Cape government speaking about this issue and putting numbers to just how much of a problem it has become. R400 million in investment and projects stalled because of these extortion rings and these gangsters effectively stopping these projects. I'm going to read from Independent Online, which wrote up this particular story and quoted the Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, as such. Now, Winde, speaking at this gathering, said the extortion had effectively, quote, strangled economic growth, with roughly R400 million worth of public infrastructure projects stalled in the province by the end of 2024 due to criminal interference. They quote him directly as having said, "This is intolerable," he said. "We must commit to working closely together to hit back at these criminals. One way in which we can do this is by giving provinces and municipalities more of a say in policing, adequately resourcing the SAPs in our province, with crime intelligence being significantly bolstered, and by properly capacitating the National Prosecuting Authority." End of quote. And of course, the Premier of the Western Cape is absolutely correct. Indeed, you cannot win this battle against these extortionists, against the construction mafia, who are beginning to demand their, quote, fair share of these economic projects without adequately well-resourced law enforcement that bites back. Don't take it from me. You're beginning to see this in KwaZulu-Natal under, of course, the Provincial Police Commissioner Mthatha, where he set up a dedicated team of police officers who are investigating these crimes and indeed bringing these criminals to book. Now, the way things shake up in KZN, of course, is that often when the police are closing in on these criminals, there's often a very deadly shootout in that part of the world, which often leaves the cops walking away from that one and the criminals taking the extortion room temperature challenge. But nonetheless, that's how things play out in KwaZulu-Natal. But the real issue here becomes it is a broader problem that has to be addressed by the South African state, the issue of the lack of law enforcement and the vacuum that leaves opening the door to these criminals. You cannot create a free, prosperous and property-earning society operating in a growing economy without law enforcement. It has to be addressed. All right, in our last story of what made the news headlines last week, indeed linked perhaps to the last one, is the floods in the Eastern Cape, Mthatha in particular, having seen 90 of our fellow South Africans losing their lives in what is a provincial disaster of note. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, Sihle, we just spoke about extortionists and construction mafia. What does that have to do with flooding? Well, the very same extortionists that I speak of, and perhaps pointing to how pervasive a problem this is, are now even demanding their fair share of water provision, relief aid in the Eastern Cape. Yeah, you heard me right. As aid groups are delivering fresh water to people who have no running water at the moment, delivering aid in that part of the world, there are extortionists who are looking to muscle in on that, threatening aid workers in that part of the world. Again, see how that story comes full circle? Without adequate law enforcement, you can't even deliver aid in South Africa without an extortionist demanding their quote-unquote fair share of that. But nonetheless, the aid group in question is the Gift of the Givers, who are doing fantastic work in responding to that disaster in the part of the world, which has displaced thousands of South Africans at the moment, are quoted in this Times Live piece as having said the following. Now, as I said, with over 2,600 residents left homeless, the municipal officials said the humanitarian relief was providing clean water to flood victims. That's last week on a Saturday, when they were actually approached and threatened by these extortionists. The criminals, as quoted here, directed them to stop what they were doing in an extortion attempt. To learn that such humanity was met with criminal opportunism is not only heartbreaking, but utterly disgusting, the municipality having said, adding that it has consistently spoken out against the growing scourge of extortion across this district, end of quote. Now, you'll know when we were in Mthatha ahead of the last elections as part of the What South Africa Can Be campaign, we spoke to residents on the ground in Mthatha, and they were the ones who expressed that extortion isn't just a once-off flash-in-the-pan incident, that it become endemic in that part of the world. So let me not fool myself. I was not surprised to hear the story. And indeed, police in that part of the world should not act surprised as these cases are now rearing their ugly head at a time of disaster like this one. And any of these cases that are now being reported to SAPS should be acted on, and indeed, maybe take your cue from the KZN police on how to deal with them. And in other news, of course, you might know that 700 million rand is about to float around in the political ether. And the hyenas, of course, are already licking their lips, like that one scene in The Lion King. Yeah, I'm giving my age away. When them three hyenas get that money my way. Well, this 700 million rand that sees these individuals licking their lips is for a national dialogue. Now, again, I'm not the only one who's expressed disdain and indeed shock at the idea of 700 million rand being spread across the elites who will be chattering about our problems in this country on social media. People went crazy on this particular issue. Yeah, as you can see, people expressing outrage at the idea that 700 million rand, guys, 300 million rand short of R1 billion is going to be spent on a talk shop, a national dialogue by the presidency. Now, the presidency themselves have responded to this because they saw the furor around this, because people were asking the question, 700M. That money could be spent on much more useful things. You could spend it, I mean, we've been talking about extortionists on this episode. You could spend it on bolstering visible policing, bolstering the number of detectives we have in SAPS. You could spend it on building more clinics in this country that are well-resourced. I can go down the line on things that you could actually spend 700 million rand much more effectively than on a national dialogue, which will likely, again, don't take it from me, one can just look at recent history. These national dialogues often become an exercise of political parties and politicians bussing in supporters in order for them to parrot from various scripts their talking points in these sessions in order to, again, buy favor with politicians. No one wants this. We don't need this. We don't need a country that keeps talking. We need one where the government, and indeed us as South Africans, because one should never remove one's own responsibility in these sort of issues, but effectively, us as South Africans and the government begin to act on the things that we now need. But again, now he highlighted that no official government budget has yet been set aside and that the 700 million rand figure circulating in public discourse is merely a, quote, proposal raised by external foundations involved in the planning phases. Now, he's directly quoted as having said, we don't have a budget at this point. Government is yet to formulate the budget that will then go through all the necessary and stipulated budgetary processes before we can come out to the public and say, here is what it's going to cost you. That's according to uMakwenya, end of quote. Now, here's the problem, and I'll end it here. It's the levels of trust that South Africans have generally to the government and institutions of the state when it comes to this kind of mega spending on things. It's often associated as money going to disappear into the pockets of the who's who hobnobs in this country. And what makes it worse, and indeed was reflected in the furor, the anger that we saw on social media and indeed on talk radio last week, were people saying, do we even need to be spending anywhere near this kind of money on a talk shop, when most South Africans are now demanding action? All right, guys, we are at that interesting point of the show where we ended off by deciphering who is our either champ of the week or our Moemish of the week. And indeed, this week we have a Moemish. Who is our Moemish of the week? And our Moemish of the week is Julius Malema, leader of the EFF. What a Moemish. And of course, why is Julius Malema the Moemish of the week? Well, he's beginning to find out that what we excuse in this country, the rest of the world is not excusing. And what am I talking about here, Big Daddy Liberty? Well, effectively, a politician in this day and age singing and screaming and chanting songs about killing fellow South Africans, despite what we as South Africans argue is the context of that song, is simply not playing over the same way to an international audience. Now, it began, of course, with what happened in the White House, with one Donald Trump citing Julius Malema as one of the reasons for various programs that they're initiating. Again, I'm not prosecuting that issue on the show, but from there, and it's moved across the pond to the United Kingdom, where last week, you'll remember, where indeed the UK citing two reasons for denying Julius Malema his visa. The first being, of course, the racially charged songs that are often sung at political rallies by the EFF, down to even statements that Malema has made, from citing his desire to cut the throat of whiteness, as he put it, or more divisively, the notion that he hasn't called for the slaughter of white people, not just yet. The UK, of course, citing that these are the reasons why they're not welcoming Julius Malema into their country. Now, I want to read from effectively the Independent, which wrote the story up and gave a bit more clarity around what the UK was saying on this issue. Now, of course, in detailing why they are refusing Malema his visa, in a letter dated on the 17th of June, the UK Home Office stated that future visa applications are also unlikely to succeed unless, quote, Malema alters his stance. Malema, who has previously travelled to the UK, was denied entry this time after a review of his public conduct and political statements. The UK Home Office said his presence in the country is, quote, not conducive to the public good, close quote, citing both character and association concerns. Among the issues flagged was Malema's public support for Hamas, a terrorist organization in the Middle East, which is an organization banned in the UK under terrorism laws, end of quote. Now, it seems absolutely clear to me that what we excuse here in South Africa, I mean, you'll hear often the South African media, indeed the chattering classes and the elites, often batting for Julius Malema, trying to contextualize a lot of these utterances and these chants, and indeed the overt and open support for violent, murderous terrorist groups around the world. What we excuse, the rest of the world simply has no place for. And it begs the question, as perhaps for us as South Africans, should we not be applying higher standards for our politicians? Now, it's Julius Malema in this instance, but really, this could apply to nearly all our politicians in this country. Should we not be holding a much higher standard for leadership in this country? Why should it take foreign powers to point out what is effectively the absolute obvious in this case? And when it comes to Julius Malema, it's not just us, ordinary folks who are opposed to that kind of language, who are opposed to those sort of ideas, who are criticizing him. Even his own peers in his own party, if you remember a lot of the polling that came out, where his own members were asking, why are we singing this song? There is a clear voice, a voice with clarity, if you will, that is beginning to question why we are putting up with this kind of rhetoric as South Africans, especially in a country like ours, where the levels of violence do not justify any political leader getting on stage and singing a song about exterminating one group of South Africans for whatever reason, race or otherwise. This is the reason why Julius Malema is deservedly our Moemish of the week. Guys, remember to, of course, like the channel. That's the Big Daddy Liberty channel on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel. Subscribe. Guys, help me reach my goal of reaching to 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And with that being said, also like the Truth Report on YouTube. With that being said, thank you so much for watching the show as we look at the news week that was. And as always, we'll be watching.